Chapter 5 Imperialism in Crisis, the Home Front. In Vietnam, the imperialist soldiers encounter the discomforts of those who, accustomed to the vaunted U.S. standard of living, must face a hostile land, the insecurity of those who are unable to move without being aware of walking on enemy territory, death to those who advance beyond their fortified encampments, the permanent hostility of an entire population. All of this provokes internal repercussions in the U.S. and encourages the resurgence of a factor which was attenuated in the full vigor of imperialism, class struggle even within its own territory. Che Guevara, Message to the Tricontinental. Friends and enemies. We are living in a huge and naturally beautiful land. The mountains and deserts and the plains hold the riches of history from Indian tribes who dwelt there, places like Four Corners and the Black Hills. Sacred land to the Navajo and the Sioux. Eagles fly overhead in some areas, and coyotes howl at the moon. Snowlands, riverlands, traveled many times, seen by many people's eyes. No wonder we scream at the plunder, the wastefulness, and the wreckage. The streams and lakes float with dead fish, victims of industrial waste. The mountains are ripped apart for the wealth of strip-mined coal. The air is thick with pollution. Profit chases greed in a reckless race against the earth. Most people live in the cities, giant centers of commerce and production. The cities contain tremendous potential for human development and community, but the potential is mocked by the reality. Burned and abandoned houses, dirty avenues, and children living in cold apartments. This crowded up against extravagant wealth and the centers of imperial power. Still, the culture of the many people grows tenaciously. What kind of society is it? It is a class society, torn by contradictions. The heartland of a bloody empire, built on the attempted genocide of Native Americans, the trade in African slaves, the lives of Chinese and Japanese and Filipino workers, the exploitation of successive waves of immigrant labor. It is an imprisoner of nations, Guam, Samoa, the Virgin Islands, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the Black and Chicano nations. Like other empires, it combines stolen lands, stolen riches, and stolen labor. The anarchy of production. Stolen wealth, not Yankee ingenuity, is the basis of the tremendous concentration in the U.S. of productive forces. Large factories with advanced machinery, elaborate computer systems, highly extended organization, the labor of women and men from many nations, all contributing to an astounding productive capability. This accumulated productive power is used for the most selfish and backward purposes. Whereas this wealth is produced by the people of the world, it is used to enrich the idle handful that controls it, and to subjugate the dispossessed with the destructive power of economic control and war. Monopoly capital and imperialism is an irrational system. It is not organized to meet human needs. It is run by a very small ruling class whose only morality is the morality of the maximum profit. This handful of white men control the enormous concentrations of wealth, the means of production, and the government. These are the imperialists, the common enemy. They hog the wealth which the people produce. 32% of the personal wealth in the U.S. is owned by 1.6% of the population. Who are these enemies? Of all the imperial dynasties and major thieves of our time, the Rockefeller family stands out. The phenomenal growth of their clan's influence and riches parallels the development of U.S. imperialism. They are the richest people in the world, richer than anyone has ever been before, and they are getting richer all the time. Their wealth is about as much as all the blacks, Chicanos, Indians, Puerto Ricans, and 40 million poor whites in the U.S. have put together. Like all the other imperial dynasties and families, their wealth has been dispersed into an invisible empire, which has spread to every corner of the world. It is an empire which includes the world's largest banks and industrial corporations, aerospace, computers, oil, insurance, telephones, and television. The Rockefellers control 20% of banking in the U.S. and 20% of all its industry. This vast empire of wealth and power is built to grow, to self-perpetuate, to entangle everywhere on earth that it can. It feeds on domination over the people. Its social policies are welfare cuts, stop and frisk, and drug detention laws. It dislocates whole populations from our cities for the construction of huge monuments to the god Prophet, to commerce and world trade. It meets rebellion, as at Attica, with the iron heel. The Rockefellers' policies exist from the continued immiseration of most of humanity and the continued spiral of concentration of power and wealth into their hands. They are not the only ones. The heads of Ford and General Motors each receive yearly salaries of almost $1 million. Yet 1/3 of the U.S. people are considered poor by the government's figures. We measured the energy crisis by cold houses, sick children, and lost jobs, while the oil companies increased their profits over last year by as much as 130%. This irrational and revolting system leaves much social wealth wasted and undeveloped. What is produced bears little relationship to what is needed. For this reason, Marxist-Leninists speak of the anarchy of production when we refer to the way productive forces are organized under imperialism. The great injustice of this system is that it leaves potential unrealized while maintaining scarcity for billions of people. All economic activity that does not go to satisfy human need is waste. Advertising and marketing, a $30 billion a year business, useless consumer goods, planned obsolescence, bureaucracy, and the military are all aspects of waste. Add up to the social cost of maintaining this outmoded system. It is working people and the oppressed of empire who bear the cost. The scale on which military spending consumes capital is staggering. The annual military budget is larger than the net incomes of all U.S. corporations put together. With this, the U.S. maintains missiles, submarines, electronic warfare, and chemical and biological agents, nuclear weapons, bomber forces, and over 3,000 military bases around the world. This dominance of militarization in the economy distorts every aspect of U.S. life, the conditions of life. The purpose of class analysis is to isolate the enemy and identify our potential friends. Who will lead the fight? Who can be won over? Who can be, at least, neutralized? This framework is as important as battle plans. Class analysis should not use the borders of the U.S. like blinders on a horse. This deprives us of the full picture and throws strategy into chaos. Domestic class analysis must be integrated with the reality of U.S. imperialism as a world economy. There is one system operating internally and externally. There is a unified strategy for power and control, although the applications and tactics vary greatly. There is one main class enemy. Class analysis must see the entire system and realistically take into account imperial plunder, the distorting culture of privilege and racism, and the realities of national division. In the United States, the imperialists stand opposed to the huge majority of poor and working people who have no control over the fruits of their labor. The ruling class divides us against each other by mechanism of stratification and competition, and thereby maintains its own power. Some of these divisions are based on real differences in wealth, status, power, freedom, ability to survive, and be happy. Some of them are imposed by school, by religious training, or the family. We are imbued with the sense of differentness from other people in the world. The strength of the divisions among us measure only the effectiveness of control over all dispossessed people by rulers of society. The revolutionary process will sweep these away, seize the transformation of society as a whole, and do away with privilege and advantage. U.S. society is corrupted by the values that necessarily accompany piracy: racism, greed, competitiveness, brutality, sexism, and callousness. The ruling class calls the backward criminal aspects of culture into being and sets them in motion. The society is the rat race, marked by an antisocial premium on individualism. There is a stark poverty for masses of people materially and culturally, a poverty in the quality of life. Hunger and starvation are world realities. In the U.S., over 30 million people cannot afford to meet basic nutritional needs. In spite of these facts, the U.S. government pays farmers billions of dollars a year not to grow food. This keeps food prices high. The war of the rich and the poor has taken on terrible proportions. The face of famine, malnutrition, epidemic against face of glut. The image on page 112 is blurry and I can't make it out. Sorry about that. Close to half the U.S. population has one or more chronic condition. Diabetes, asthma, arthritis, heart disease, high blood pressure. Medical care is inadequate and inaccessible for most people. Since 1960, medical costs have been rising twice as fast as the skyrocketing cost of living, and hospital costs 5 times that. One night in a hospital costs a week's pay for a worker. Health insurance companies are getting rich from the people's pain. The horror intensifies for poor people. Malnutrition is the great hidden cause of disease in the U.S. With humane priorities, the violence of socially unnecessary pain would be eradicated. Women's health would be a priority. People would not die from hunger or poverty-related illness. Illiteracy is increasing in the United States. Schools systematically refuse to teach black and third world children to read. Millions of people in this country are illiterate. Schools are minimum security prisons, geared to repression and control of the young, to teaching the lessons of competition, self-hatred, fear, and loneliness. Work is hard to get. Unemployment in early 1974 is running at 5.1% of the workforce. This is considered acceptable by capitalist economists. The government also admits that there are at least 8 to 10% unemployed or underemployed who are not shown in the statistics. These low estimates add up to 12 million U.S. workers out of work or semi-employed. Women are chronically underemployed. Large numbers of young people are marginally employed. Black people have twice the unemployment rate of the population as a whole. When people do find work, it is alienating and oppressive under imperialism. Industrial accidents resulting in deaths or serious injury are astronomical. Speed up at plants like the Vega plant in Lordstown, Ohio, leave workers exhausted, tense, and drained at the end of the day. Miners suffer from chronic lung diseases. Factory discipline is rigidly enforced. Between 1960 and 1968, disciplinary cases doubled at Ford plants in the United States. Absenteeism among workers is on the rise. Work in the United States stifles and imprisons the worker. Production for war and waste turns the fulfilling aspect of work into its hateful opposite. 1/4 of the United States people are living in substandard housing, dilapidated or lacking in adequate plumbing or heating and fire traps. Half of the black people in the United States live in bad housing. Peeling paint in tenements has led to a major plague of lead paint poisoning. Lead poisoning today cripples more children annually than did polio before the Salk vaccine. Children are exposed to rat bites as well as broken down facilities leading to accidents and disease. Families are forced to pay high rents for rotten apartments. This tears apart poor people's communities in order to build more profitable, higher rent apartments, irrational tract housing, which destroys the countryside, and mobile homes, which are structurally unsound and dangerous, financed, of course, at incredible profits. The housing crisis produces profits for real estate speculators and big landlords, and unlivable conditions for millions of U.S. people. Old age, instead of being a mark of respect and value, is scary in our society. Old people are poor. Many die in old age homes as if age were a disease. This society discards those whose labor is no longer exploitable for market value. The premium put on youth distorts human links between generations. Old people's lessons from life and stories of the past are seldom learned, our loss. Children are denied self-respect, dignity, and creativity. They have no social power in a driving competitive society. Almost nothing is built with small people in mind: stairs, toilets, turnstiles, signs, systems of transportation. Schools, television, and publishing companies subject young people to a brutal culture of ultraviolence, sexist stereotypes, and racism. Children are denied community. Daycare facilities are minimal and always facing severe cutbacks. Kids are newer people and have, by the fact of being born, earned the rights that all human beings deserve. Personal debt to banks and corporations has increased astronomically in the past decade. The ruling class controls and manages millions of people by tying them to their system with debt. Because of high inflation and unemployment, delinquencies on installment loans hit a new high during January and February 1974. The graphic on page 114 looks to me like tenement apartment housing buildings. Page 115. All of this has a profoundly destructive effect on the people and the quality of life in the United States. People turn against one another and ourselves. Over 1/2 of the hospital beds in the United States are occupied by mental patients. Alcoholism, drug addiction, child beating, rape, gambling, anger, and suicide are all at crisis proportions. For people in the United States, the basic fact of life is fear. People are afraid of society. No one knows what is going to happen. Fear of illness, fear of getting laid off. Afraid to go outdoors. Afraid of black people moving into the neighborhood. Afraid of loss of status. Afraid of not looking right. Afraid of being taken advantage of. Afraid to speak up. Afraid of growing old. Still, Vietnam and Black Rebellion, the resistance of youth, and the rising of women begin to pry open minds and reclaim people imperialism tried to destroy. It is harder to sell the bourgeois life. The lace over the machinery of greed and brutality has gaping holes. The circus has lost its glitter. Imperialism's seamy side up is up for those who will examine its ugly contours and help plan its downfall. The changing nature of the working class. People who must sell their labor power in order to survive make up the large and growing U.S. proletariat, working class. The position in society of the working class is in fundamental conflict with the role and function and activities of the imperialists. Oppressed peoples, women, and youth, and other anti-imperialist forces can and should deliver blows against the empire now. The actual building of socialism cannot succeed without the active support of the industrial proletariat. This is the proletariat's historic mission. It is a revolutionary duty to analyze and interpret the factors and causes which are obstacles to forward the motion of the working class in the struggle against the class enemy. One can repeat formulas of class structure according to income and work and feel like a lot has been accomplished. But what is needed is a concrete analysis of concrete conditions, the living soul of Marxism. What is needed is a method that analyzes the motions of society, the contradictions and the changes, in relationship to historical realities, possibilities, and necessities. In the United States, in the past 20 years, the white industrial proletariat has seldom exercised its revolutionary initiative. Third world peoples in the United States, and also women, youth, and members of the armed forces have shown the most consistent initiative and practice as measured by the decisive anti-imperialist struggle of this entire period, the war in Vietnam. These groups have been the carriers of proletarian internationalism for this time. The historic prediction of the leading role of the industrial proletariat in capitalist countries emphasized the concrete processes by which the workers would be socialized and would increasingly find themselves in a common situation of oppression. One of the defining characteristics of the U.S. working class is that it is composed of workers of both the oppressor and the oppressed nations. Any attempt to predict the role of the U.S. working class must place great emphasis on the leadership that has been given by black and third world people. The changing nature of the working class places black and third world workers in a strategic position. They have become a major part of basic industry, steel, auto, chemical, transportation, as well as the vital sectors that service the cities, hospital, transit, and clerical work. This has created a new level of militant leadership from below, challenging white supremacy in the unions, confronting and radicalizing white co-workers. Black and third world workers have raised demands in the interest of the whole class, including the colonized of empire, in contrast to the existing leadership of the labor aristocracy represented by the AFL-CIO hierarchy, which raises demands that favor the most skilled, works against the interests of the poor and the unorganized, and helps sustain imperialism. The image on 116 I cannot make out. Imperialism on the decline creates new historic conditions for organizing revolutionary struggles in the oppressor nation. The crisis has affected millions. But crisis does not automatically produce red consciousness. The traditional solution to domestic economic crisis, war, remains an option for imperialism. In the face of imperial decline, the rulers make fascistic appeals to whites to try to recoup economic stability and privilege by going along with and enforcing even more intensified oppression of third world people, welfare cutbacks, miseducation, and expeditionary war against third world revolution. The imperialists are only able to do this by launching counter-revolution at home as well as abroad. The revolutionary potential and contribution of poor, unemployed, and imprisoned people cannot be dismissed within the category of lumpen proletariat. Modern imperialism involves chronic stagnation, creating large numbers of permanently unemployed or underemployed people. This large group cannot be equaled with the small group described by Marx. Cultural and community ties between today's unemployed and the most exploited workers here plays a leading role in the working class struggle. Working class unity cannot be built on the terms of the most privileged sectors. Rather, the demands of the most oppressed must be the basis for isolating the labor aristocracy in their support for U.S. imperialism and for building a revolutionary class unity. There is as yet no dynamic way to analyze the class position of women. The class of a woman is typically determined by the class of her husband or her father. This solely derivative criteria is sexist. The usual alternative is to define a woman's class solely by her role in the workforce. Yet in itself, this is inadequate since the overwhelming majority of women perform socially necessary labor of reproducing and caring for children, and taking care of home and mate. The work of women holds up half the sky. A synthesis of women's household work and her work in the productive process is demanded by these conditions and has yet to be fully achieved. The concept of a giant inclusive middle class, as applied to salaried and wage workers who must work to live, is essentially a status category, broadly representing income differences, not a true class. Granting higher status has been a major tactic of social control, raised to an ideological weapon, to mute conflicting class interests by making the affluence of a few the aspirations of many. In fact, the true middle class is more and more an insignificant segment of the population. The great mass of the white-collar workers, clericals, service people, teachers and professionals are underpaid, exploited, and profoundly bored by the daily dullness of their routines. They comprise the majority of the U.S. workforce at home. They cling to the image of respectability that once separated the old middle class from the mass of blue-collar workers. Their consciousness must be changed. The interpretation of women's consciousness, youth consciousness, and third world national identity are great channels through which their class consciousness, as workers opposing their class enemy, can be irrigated and made fertile. As imperialist crisis deepens, the entire fabric of social control is tightened and becomes more severe. Law and order and the propaganda barrage to instill capitalist values all intensify. The cultural crisis created, however, spills out in rebellion, in resistance to alienating work, and in revolution. Revolutionary constituencies will form along lines of cultural cohesion, as well as class lines. Cultural identity can be an impatient element in the process of revolutionizing mass groups. This has been seen in national liberation movements, and also to some degree in the women's movement and the youth movement. There are broad social movements developing and growing in the United States. We have experienced in the last decade a tremendous upsurge of anti-imperialist consciousness and a severe breakdown of the established institutions of power and cultural control. All of this affects the consciousness and social political direction of the working class and provides important new openings for revolutionary organizing. Graphic on the bottom of 117 is a bunch of people raising their fists. Page 118. Black and other third world people in the United States. Black and other third world people in the United States make up oppressed nations, subjugated peoples. The oppression of third world peoples takes many of the same forms as the imperialist control of people in colonies in Africa, Asia, or Latin America. The Black Nation. The Black Nation in the United States is huge, the second largest Black nation in the world. It is a nation formed out of distinct common history. The Black Revolution is rooted in the cultural identity, common oppression, and resistance, which synthesizes two realities: the African who was stolen to this country, and the slave and descendants of slaves who built it. The struggles of Black people in this generation have shaken racist power and culture of the heart of empire, because the colonized status of Black and third world peoples in the United States, inside the heartland of imperialism, is the foundation of the economy and cultural structure of the United States. The Black struggle for self-determination is the strategic leading force of the United States Revolution, forged from a centuries-long tradition of resistance and revolt in the face of counterattack by the club, the cattle prod, the gun, and the lynch rope. From the clandestine organizations of the earliest slavery days, through mass uprisings, the open carrying of self-defense weapons, to guerrilla combat, the Black movement has historically raised the level of the whole struggle. The state has imposed the necessity. Liberation movements in other countries have helped point the direction. By fighting for control over their communities, schools, jobs, and their future as a people, Black people also push forward the overthrow of the existing power relations in the entire society. Like any movement, the Black struggle grows by qualitative leaps and through periods of building and regrouping of forces. Organized struggles in local areas and the ongoing day-to-day battles of Black people are often not as visible as the actions and rebellions of a high-tide period, but they are urgent and necessary in the development of a people's movement. The Black movement today embraces the bursting forth of a revolutionary Black art and literature, the battles for land and political power in the rural South, consistent organized support for African liberation, the ever-increasing organization and militancy of Black women, ideological debate and study. Black political conventions in Gary and Little Rock have attempted to develop unifying strategies and direction. Black prisoners have opened a determined front behind the bars. Armed struggle against police power has continued in the cities. Always the Black movement persists, finding new forms to meet new conditions and new hardships, tenacious in the people's fight for liberation. Institutions of racism. They call us bandits, yet every time most Black people pick up our paychecks, we are being robbed. Every time we walk into a store in our neighborhood, we are being held up. And every time we pay our rent, the landlord sticks a gun into our ribs. Assata Shakur. Racism is a weapon at the command of the ruling class, deliberately fashioned into a culturally sanctioned institution, written into law and enforced by all the power of conscious custom and the state. All primary national institutions, corporations, government, social services, and organized labor are 100% effective white oppressive control. Black people as a group do not control their schools, their jobs, or national policy. Despite all the state's propaganda, Black people have not been incorporated into the upper or even middle levels of the U.S. social structure. In fact, The conditions of life for many black people have worsened over the last 10 years. During the last decade, the differential between the wages of black and white workers has increased. Segregations in the schools has increased. Drug addiction has become an epidemic. The annual sales of General Motors, $30 billion, equals the purchasing power of the entire black population. Institutionalized racism is maintained and perpetuated over the generations by the schools, the unemployment cycle, the drug trade, immigration laws, birth control, the army, and prisons. Black and Mexican and Puerto Rican and Asian labor has been essential in building the country. The labor of third world people cleans the streets, the floors, hauls the heavy loads, and cooks the food. Last hired, first fired, the unemployment rate among black people in the cities is 4 times that of whites, and the unemployment among black youth is now expected to exceed 30%. The high rate of black unemployment reduces the effects of depression cycles on the rest of the population and encourages competition instead of solidarity. As an example of the relationship, General Motors announced on January 2, 1974, that about 4,500 workers would be laid off at its Linden, New Jersey plant because of the energy crisis, quote unquote. The layoffs were part of a total of over 86,000 GM workers laid off at that time nationwide. Union officials said that 60% of the workers being laid off indefinitely at Linden were black people, Puerto Ricans, and women. Skilled workers, mostly white, were shoved back onto the assembly lines. Third world women are the lowest paid and in the least skilled jobs in the country. Black women make up half the household workers in other people's homes. They suffered the triple jeopardy of sex, race, and poverty. Black women earn less than half of what white men earn. They are confronted by an infant and maternal mortality rate, which is twice that among whites. There is no low-cost daycare due to cutbacks in welfare and health programs. The city is becoming third world territory. Third world people are a majority in the 50 of the largest cities. Where they are a large minority, New York, Chicago, Houston, Detroit, the public school populations are often more than 50% third world peoples. Much of the white population has moved to outer areas and to the suburbs. The cities do not represent, govern, serve, educate, or support their population. An army of the occupation prowls the streets of black communities. Sometimes they patrol in the name of welfare of the community. But last year, half the murders of civilians by police, including several children, were black people. In New York City alone, 53 black people were shot and killed by police in 1973. From 1968 to 1972, there were over 100 legal, quote-unquote, murders of black revolutionaries in the United States. The black community has paid a tremendous price in the loss of leaders like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Fred Hampton, Jonathan and George Jackson, Bobby Hutton, and Zaid Shakur. Black people are more likely to get arrested, to get long prison sentences, to be refused parole, to be beaten, and killed. The rulers are setting up a unified fascist infrastructure with identity cards, federal training, arming of police forces. Academic apologists preaching biological inferiority, such as William Shockley, fabricate the justifications for forced sterilization of third world women. There are attacks on a people as a whole. The heroin epidemic, a counterinsurgency weapon and product of the high profits of the international drug trade, is a form of genocide against a whole generation of black youth. In the name of a cure, methadone is replacing heroin, but serves the same purpose when controlled by the state: debilitation through addiction with the added benefit of increased control. A measure of the genocidal cost to black people of imperialist rule in their life expectancy. Today, fully 10 years less than whites. That means that nearly 300 million years of life are being stolen from black people in the United States today. The courts are machines for administering the penalties of white rulers to black victims. The prisons are living tombs. They function as a major institution of economic and political control over the black nation, the ruling class safety valve for the rebels, for the alienated. Prison acts as the control on a critical mass on the streets, out of work and hungry. There are more black men in prison than in colleges. Behavior modification techniques are now widespread in the prisons as an attempted final solution to the problem of rebellions and righteous anger. You will find no class or category more aware, more embittered, desperate, or dedicated to the ultimate remedy, revolution. The most dedicated, the best of our kind, you'll find them in Folsoms, San Quentin, and Soledad. George Jackson. Under conditions of maximum repression, black prisoners have managed to create an important center of resistance. They are organizing, studying, teaching each other, and a number of white prisoners who have joined with them the politics and skills of revolution. The prison struggle is a microcosm of the revolutionary process, combining armed resistance, mass rebellion, political education, collectives, cultural workshops, prison unions, day-to-day resistance. Since the liberation of Attica in September 1971, hundreds of prisons around the country have been held under siege by prisoners. The prison movement, the fruit of terrible material conditions and torture, has produced a heroic resistance and has given birth to many great leaders. The graphic on page 121, I can't tell if it's Attica, but it is a group of people protesting. Black culture, black power. This is the era of national liberation. Black people have recognized this early and identified with it. Malcolm X named U.S. imperialism as the common enemy. Black people welcomed Fidel to Harlem in 1961. The black movement was the first in this country to challenge Israel's right to Palestine. SNCC organized early resistance against the draft and in solidarity with the Vietnamese. Martin Luther King shook the country with his denunciation of the U.S. war in Vietnam. Muhammad Ali was another teacher in his principled resistance to the draft. A grassroots movement of cultural pride and national unity began to reclaim black history, to encourage collective consciousness and solidarity. The slogan and feeling that black is beautiful arose everywhere among black people. The oppressor society has waged war against black culture by commercialization and by subjecting to subvert it, by encouraging the form and repressing the substance. But a people's culture persists and takes new forms. Black cultural identity has drawn new strength from the progress and determination of liberation movements in Africa. In 1973, over 150,000 black people marched in support of their sisters and brothers on African Liberation Day. The political form of the national movement became the demand for black power. Black power is a revolutionary demand, a demand for freedom and self-determination. It has meant struggle for control of community institutions like the schools, hospitals, daycare centers, and demands for land and political power in the cities. It has taken the form of spontaneous mass rebellion and armed organization. The demand for black power has not been met. Each battle for power is a process of relentless struggle and mobilization. Black parents in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, have been fighting for community control of their schools for over 5 years. The United Black Workers at the Mahwah, New Jersey Ford Motor Plant have led wildcat strikes against the company and have done painstaking organizing since 1968 in their battle against white supremacy in the UAW. This kind of persistent work and sacrifice is the essence of continuing struggle for black power and liberation. Support for self-determination. Black and third world people's right to determine the direction of their struggle is undeniable. Self-determination means the right of an oppressed people to seize and organize their future and the future of their children. We support black and third world people's right to self-determination, including the right to secession. There is nothing sacred and certainly nothing historically just about the present 50-state government or the present boundaries of the United States. To argue, as some do, that black liberation must wait upon the industrial proletariat or the socialist revolution of the whole United States is both false and racist. In practice, this position demands that black people wait, that they follow an oppressor nation timetable for liberation. It ignores the fact that empires get broken down in different ways, by wars and occupation, by revolt of external and internal colonies, by disintegration and internal rot, and combinations of all those. Whatever decisions black people and other oppressed peoples make in exercising this right to self-determination, white revolutionaries and anti-imperialists have a very clear-cut responsibility to support these decisions once they've been arrived at. This does not mean to support only those choices one approves of, nor only those that can be worked out by reforms within the existing form of the United States, one nation under God, indivisible. Support for the right of self-determination is a principle and a prerequisite to a successful revolutionary movement in the oppressor nation. Native Americans. Native Americans have renewed their long history of resistance with a power, militancy, and determination which is an example for all struggles. The Indian struggle is a cultural resurgence which involves the whole people, as well as a political fight for dignity and survival. The heroic occupation of Wounded Knee was part of a fabric of audacious action which has shaken the country in recent years. The Native American takeover of Alcatraz Island, the fight of the Pitt River Indians in California to keep their land, the Nisqually and Puyallup struggles in Washington state for their fishing rights, the whole series of meetings, gatherings, and protests called the Trail of Broken Treaties, which led to the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs headquarters in Washington, D.C., 1972. Native Americans have survived all attempts at cultural, economic, and political genocide. They have made it clear that their battle continues here and now, which has shattered the white man's myth that Indian culture and resistance died with the 1890 Wounded Knee Massacre. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is the chief enemy of Indian people, a colonial administration which determines the lives of Native Americans. The BIA runs all Native American schools. All elected tribal leaders must be approved by the Interior Department or the BIA. The BIA must sanction any Indian land sales, leases, or wills. The BIA officials argue in favor of corporate land grabs on the spurious grounds that the sales revenues will bring the tribes prosperity. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is an agency which serves the interests of the U.S. rulers. Its aim is to administer the continued rip-off of Indian land and resources. The BIA has made it policy to refuse aid to the hundreds of thousands of Indians who have left the reservations and settled in the urban centers. The American Indian Movement, AIM, was born out of the struggles of these urban Indians against police brutality and impossible living conditions. Conditions on Native American reservations are a further indictment of this system. Life expectancy is 43 years. Infant mortality runs 3 times as high as the rest of the United States. 1/2 of all Indian students never graduate from the poorly serviced, run-down, racist BIA school system. BIA schools don't teach Native American languages and vilify the heritage and culture of Indian people. Reclaiming the Native American past is one of the basic elements of the Indian struggle today. The destruction and theft of Native American land has continued. Northern Cheyenne and Crow people of Montana are faced with the plans of major coal companies like Peabody to strip mine their territory and build a massive industrial complex. Lumber companies on the West Coast have bought hundreds of thousands of acres of Indian land in the last few years. Purchases arranged through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Many of the resource exploitation projects underway in the Canadian North, like the huge James Bay hydroelectric project in Quebec. They're being developed on land which still belongs to Indian and Eskimo people. Ecological devastation, accompanied by loss of community and an inability to maintain tribal ways, are the results of these land grabs by major corporations and governments. The fight to save their land and their right to use it remains a fundamental part of the lives of Native Americans. One of the most important current Indian battles surrounds the United States' persecution of the Wounded Knee liberators. Over 300 defendants, including the leadership of AIM, are being charged with felonies. Trials are taking place throughout South Dakota and in Minnesota. A major political point at the trial, as at the Wounded Knee occupation, is that the government has broken the 1868 treaty with the Oglala people. The Oglalas rightfully demand that this treaty, which proclaims their sovereignty as a people, be respected and upheld. Support the Wounded Knee freedom fighters. The Chicano struggle. The Chicano movement grows out of the struggle of 10 million oppressed people who live inside the United States, mostly in the Southwest. Just as the Black nation has been denied its true history, official history has tried to deny the real accomplishments and irrepressible resistance of the Chicano people. What's called the Southwest of the United States is in reality El Norte, the vast borderland of Mexico robbed in the Mexican-American War of 1848. The Mexican people, La Raza, are an Indo-Hispano people, mestizos. They have strong Indian roots reaching to the original inhabitants of the Americas. Legend has it that the Aztecs originated in this region called Aztlan, the spiritual homeland of La Raza. The struggle to reclaim Chicano land was dramatically renewed in 1967 by the land grant movement in New Mexico. The attack on Tierra Amarilla Courthouse in June 1967 was a guerrilla attack against the domestic agency of colonialism. For many Anglos, this raid produced the first real consciousness of the Chicano people's historical and legal claim to the land of the Southwest. This Anglo-occupied territory has been developed largely through the slave-like exploitation of Mexican labor. Chicanos are forced into the most arduous and hazardous jobs at low wages but are fighting back. The dedicated struggle by the farm workers to win union recognition is now threatened by the alliance between the Teamsters Union and the growers, carried out with violent attacks and sweetheart contracts. This move is a major attempt to defeat the UFWU and break its popular base. Chicano women have won a hard-fought 2-year strike for union recognition against the Farrah Clothing Company in southern Texas. Hundreds of thousands of Mexican citizens enter the U.S. illegally every year. They are hired for agricultural, industrial, and service jobs at wages often below the U.S. minimum wage, without access to social services and welfare. Employers try to use immigrant workers to depress wages and break strikes of Chicano workers. The conditions that cause this immigration are a result of U.S. domination of Mexico's economy. U.S. companies inside Mexico pay workers $2 to $3 a day, reap up to 60% profits on investments, leaving Mexico underdeveloped. Unemployment in Mexico, by some estimates, is up to 48%. Resistance to U.S. imperialism in Mexico has intensified greatly in the past year, including a guerrilla kidnapping of the U.S. consul in Guadalajara Bombings of U.S. corporations in Mexico, destruction of unsafe farm labor buses in Mexicali. Inside the United States, the Mexican immigrant workers are treated with racism and brutality. They suffer unsafe bus transport with frequent accidents and death, phony imprisonment resulting in coerced labor, and periodic attacks and roundups by the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. These roundups of illegal quote-unquote immigrants are a form of police terror against the entire Chicano community. For example, in the summer of 1973, 11,000 people were rounded up within the Los Angeles area and deported. There is no judicial process for quote-unquote aliens, and in the barrio, brown skin is probable cause for harassment and arrest. There were widespread community protests and demonstrations against these fascist measures. The police occupy the barrio. In addition to general harassment, they attempt to terrorize the people with periodic murders of unarmed Chicanos. A related strategy for destruction is a police-protected importation of drugs into the barrio. In response to police terror, there have been militant mobilizations of the people, youth organizations, community support for police victims, concerted efforts to drive drug pushers out of the community. In 1970 and 1971, an underground Chicano group in Los Angeles carried out a series of guerrilla bombings against school, police, and corporate targets. The oppressor systematically attacks the culture, language, and history of the Chicano people. The concern for a truthful Chicano education for the children is a center of the struggle. There have been militant high school rebellions in Denver, Colorado, school walkouts in Los Angeles, fights for bilingual education and for Chicano history and culture throughout the Southwest. Pride in La Raza is strong. Chicano art and poetry are flourishing in the barrio. At the height of the Vietnam War, Chicanos were hit hard by disproportionately high draft calls and casualty rates, coerced to fight against sisters and brothers in Vietnam. Resistance was high. The Chicano Moratorium became the leading anti-war force in Los Angeles. Their August 1970 demonstration drew 50,000 people who fought back militantly when the police attacked and killed 3 Chicanos. The oppression of Chicanos is deep and the resistance is extensive. Anglos have borrowed and benefited from Chicano culture, skills, labor, and struggles. The liberation struggle of La Raza is critical to creating a humane society in the United States. We have a responsibility and a human need to learn about and actively support the Chicano struggle for self-determination. The rising of women. The women's movement is rooted in the common oppression of women. It is built on women's continuous resistance to sexism and is the granddaughter of the organized struggles of women 120 years ago. It is a popularly based movement, imbued with the unique spirit and the fierce beauty of masses of women actively claiming our power and our futures. It contains the power to transform and become a leading force in revolution. The condition of women. The subjugation of women is intrinsic to imperialism. Male supremacy is given concrete form in the family, in the workforce, and in social institutions. Sexism is perpetuated and enforced by the culture and ideology of imperial society. So basic is the oppression of women to the functioning of the system that while many women can improve their circumstances within the system, we cannot win fully collective liberation without overturning the entire structure of imperialism. Home and family. The modern male-run nuclear home, when we tear away the veil of sentimentality, is the basic unit of capitalist society. Capitalism and the modern family matured together historically, feeding each other's development. In the family, women both reproduce the labor force and begin the socialization process of the new generation, which is essential to the productive system and the functioning of society. Women bear the major responsibility for the nurturing, health, and education for families. These are treated like personal problems, yet they are necessary tasks, fulfilled at minimal cost and effort to the imperialists. Housework is hard work, done alone, but is denied any social value and is not paid in any way. It is paid in barter, consumer comfort, a sense of economic security, or status. The individual capitalist family structure is a wasteful social form and not healthy for children to grow up in, a trap for women. It is a sanctioned form of sexual exploitation and a hypocritical double standard. The family breeds competitiveness among us, allows no future to women with grown children, and demeans old women, separating them from the life of the community. Yet in a hostile competitive society such as this one, the family is for many, third world and poor people, the only center of community, of collective survival, a refuge. Until other forms can grow and develop, the family will remain necessary as well as intolerable. There are many families, as increasing number, headed by women. The ability of single mothers to work and raise and care for children and maintain a household is a monument to women's strength and determination. Women work both inside and outside the home. Having so many unemployed and underemployed women as a reserve of labor is a necessity to modern monopoly capital. Women are available to be exploited in case of war or some other change in the economic situation. Women are a competitively skilled group. But because of the myth that most women who work are secondary breadwinners, we work for lower pay and are neither organized nor trained. Over 40% of the workforce is women, and over 40% of women work. Women work mainly in service trades and clerical work, and those of us who work in production work mostly in semi-skilled jobs in textile, garment, and culinary trades, the traditional work of women. Although getting out of the homes gives women a place of socialized contact and some independence, it is also compounds our oppression. Women's pay averages 3/5 that of men. Of the 34 million women in the workforce, little more than 4 million are members of unions. Women workers who are organized are mostly in unions notorious for white male control. There are no maternity leave benefits and no daycare facilities. The lowest paid workers in the United States are black and third world women. Government policies. Women are opposed and controlled by government agencies and are the immediate victims of economic crisis. The Department of Health, Education and Welfare, HUE, for example, directly affects the lives of millions of women and their families. HUE is the largest domestic arm of the government, comparable in size and function only to the Defense Department. HUE is a classic institution of male supremacy built on the oppression of women, children, and old people. It is typical of the male monopoly of power. Caspar Weinberger, known as Cap the Knife for his budget cuts, makes $60,000 a year as the head of HUE. He is a Nixon man and a leech. The brunt of HUE policies falls on women. Rockefeller and Reagan have been running model HUE programs to force as many people off welfare as possible, especially AFDC. Welfare amounts to government-enforced malnutrition. People are maintained below subsistence. Today, 45% of all city families headed by women live in poverty. By official standards, that means improperly nourished. 5 million women in the United States are medically indigent, face undiagnosed and untreated illness. Threatened with losing the few crumbs of welfare, women are coerced, for economic and racist reasons, into sterilization programs. Last year, HUE financed between 100 and 200,000 sterilizations through Medicaid and special family planning clinics. If you are black or poor or old or a woman who is a head of a household, you are directly affected by the HUE programs. They control your money and rob you of your dignity and your privacy as a condition of aid. In certain ways, HUE is to poor women like the Bureau of Indian Affairs is to Native American people. It claims to be the giver of life's necessities, but under the guise of providing social services, it functions to control and contain us as a safety valve against crisis and revolt. HUE is really the Department of Illness, Ignorance, and Wretchedness. The culture of sexism. Sexism is enforced and perpetrated by the imperial culture. From birth, women are taught to think of ourselves as weak in mind and body, passive, second-rate, dependent objects. The organization of society teaches and reinforces the inferiority of women. Through schools, we are channeled and directed to prepare for marriage and sex-segregated jobs, denied a full contribution. Later, these same schools blame mothers for the failure of children to learn to read. The media portrays women as empty-headed, sexy, and addicted consumers. Older women are shunted aside, doped, ridiculed, and patronized, cut off from useful work and creativity. We are taught that our biology is our destiny. We are conditioned to look and act within narrow confines to fulfill our primary role as sexual partners and reproducers. Distorted and competitive standards of beauty are the surface over a whole system of sexual objectification. We live in an anti-life culture, where women are denied control of our bodies, where sexual repression and taboos go hand in hand with prostitution and sexual exploitation. Men are taught to use women. The underside of this objectification is rape, a massive, brutal system of terror perpetrated on women by men. Most rapes are not reported, so the statistics are far lower than the reality, but attacks on women constitute the fastest growing category of crime in the United States. The paralyzing fear of rape and sexual abuse, fanned by media and police warnings, adds up to an unofficial curfew for women. The oppression of women perverts the cultural values of the whole society. Men are alienated from children and from human emotion. Women are cut off from one another, threatened, and competing. Sexism is a form of cultural conditioning which enables the system to exploit everyone. The women's movement. The women's movement has reached into every home, awakening women's potential and challenging our subjugation. Its achievements are substantial. Reclaiming our heritage. Women are reconstructing the buried truth about women, weaving together the real history of women's contributions, rebellions, and defeats. We are tearing apart the lies of docility and placing ourselves back in history. Unearthing knowledge of the past has led to a rediscovery of witches and warriors, abolitionists and artists, ancient myths and common women, laborers and healers, breaking the chains of self-hatred, self-denial, and despair. Feminism entered women's lives like a whirlwind and a blessing. It threw lives into turmoil. Marriages burst apart. Long-suppressed anger erupted in painful everyday confrontations with sexism. Women's consciousness was seized as the last hope for sanity. We took up the fight to define ourselves. We are giving birth to ourselves. Women liking women. Women have found one another, and that has made the biggest difference of all. We begin to learn from each other and teach each other to build on the commonality of our experience. Sisterhood does not always come easily, and we learn to fight for it. Relations based on power preclude the realization of affections and intimacy. They drain our strength and are fought on uneven terms. Mutual and expressive sexuality is part of the human potential for liberation. This has become a striving and a strength of the women's movement, in relationships between women and men, and in relationships between women. Lesbianism has been an affirmation of unity and a challenge to the partnership of sexuality and domination. Women have opposed the dominant culture's treatment of homosexuals, people who are harassed, assaulted, denied employment and housing, raped, and even murdered because they do not conform to standard sexual roles and morality. Not all gay culture transcends the sexism of U.S. life, but the independence of lesbian sisters and the attempts of gay people to live according to their own definitions represent an attack on sexist ideology which subjugates women. We support the right of all women to live according to their sexual preference without discrimination or fear of reprisals. Women's culture. Women have traditionally been the guardians and transmitters of culture, and women's liberation has loosened an explosion of writing, music, and art for and by women. Women's culture reflects and pulls forward our collective aspirations. The creation of women's alternative institutions, anti-sexist and pro-women, includes health clinics, daycares, schools, newspapers, and communities. We are trying to raise children without sexist stereotypes, with new values, learning new skills, trying to deal with the problems of mental health, aging, and mutual survival. Institutional sexism. Sexism is carried by and perpetuated by the culture and by men. These are often its most visible and blatant manifestations. But underlying sexist culture is the systematic institutionalization of male supremacy. The women's movement uncovered and began to oppose and attack the institutions which categorize sexism. Anti-sexist men. Sexism, which denies the humanity of women, destroys the humanity of men. Men, too, are understanding that sexism makes them emotionally barren and culturally warped. In response to the challenge of women, many men have begun to make a commitment to struggle against sexism. These allies are a victory of the women's movement. They are an indication of the potential for further alliances with those in struggle and with oppressed people everywhere. Graphic at the top of page 130. I can't really make it out, but it seems like it's the North Vietnamese flag with the women's symbol around it. Task for Revolutionary Women. At this point, there is no widely felt organized force of revolutionary women. This has yet to be defined and built. This force is necessary to realize the full potential of the uprising of women, to carry it forward, to embody and fight for the collective interests of women. We recognize the necessity of resisting and destroying the anti-women institutions of society. We recognize that sexism and imperialism are the enemy of all oppressed women, and that is our common ground. Our goal is the development of a feminism which genuinely determines, safeguards, and defends the collective interests of women and which points in the direction of revolution. We need to build a revolutionary feminism. Women are not isolated from the clashes and contradictions in United States society. These are reflected in the contradictions holding back the development of a revolutionary woman's politics. Class privilege, racism, liberalism, and anti-militancy, if not met head-on, will militate against the development of revolutionary feminism and defeat the struggle for the full freedom of women. When the women's movement first began, its spontaneity and openness was a great strength. We now have to rise the political questions, struggle them out, and organize ourselves. Organization and leadership are major weapons of revolution. We cannot afford to give them because of fear of elitism. Anti-elitism is destructive if its political content isn't left-wing. We need to study to have ideological debate among women who work in many different facets of the struggle to create a new and comprehensive analysis of women in society and in revolution. Overcoming class privilege. God Almighty made women. The Rockefeller gang made ladies. Mother Jones. The women's movement grew up as a cross-class movement. The strength of this lies in our recognition of the commonality of women, exposing the shallowness of false middle-class consciousness and making alliances widely against our real enemies. Ruling class women who are committed to their class interests are clearly enemies. They sustain and take part in the oppression of women around the world. They are collaborators. Unless they renounce their privileges and join the struggle, they will always be the enemy. Bourgeois feminism, in all its forms, has come to play a leading role in defining the voice of the women's movement. Bourgeois feminism, which is also the feminism for white women, is the fight for individual solutions to the oppression of women, even though it may be cloaked in very radical language and the forms of liberation. Bourgeois feminism assumes that the advancement of individual women to positions of power in the society, on corporate boards of directors, for example, is somehow a victory for women as a group. But career-making women, for some, is a fight for privilege, and turns into a fight for the protection of that privilege from poor and third-world women underneath. Often, the freedom of upper-class women is based on having a black woman do her homework, or her housework. Imperialism is an old master at encouraging the creation of a bought-off group to split, confuse, and move against a people's movement. This is why the Ford Foundation, big industry, and the police forces and FBI are recruiting among women as well as investigating the women's movement. We can build the women's movement among poor and working women. The women's movement of the last 5 years has touched the consciousness of millions of women and raised the possibilities of seizing control over our lives, which is the first step into revolution. In this period of growing social and economic dislocation, women are at the intersection of the crises, and we will fight to survive. Opposing racism. In the past, I don't care how poor this white woman was. In the South, she still felt like she was more than us. In the North, I don't care how poor or rich this white woman were. She still felt like she was more than us. But coming to the realization of the thing, her freedom is shackled and changed to mine, and she realized for the first time that she is not free until I am free. Fannie Lou Hamer. There is a tradition of white women siding with black and third world people, and a tradition also of turning against them. Women were the prime movers in the best work of Reconstruction, but in the betrayal and counter-revolution that followed, middle-class white women withdrew from full solidarity with the black struggle and contributed to the overthrow and defeat of the Reconstruction movement. While black men were lynched for even looking at a white woman, the rape of black women by white men was institutionalized over hundreds of years. White women, raised on a pedestal, were dehumanized and desexed. We were used and complicit, as well as victims. These are historical realities which stand behind our dilemmas today. The colonized status of third world women is enforced by society on every level, even the level of self-conception. One of the most cynically destructive attacks is the infamous Moynihan Report, issued in 1965 for LBJ's Great Society. This doctrine says that the black family is pathological, sick, because of the strength of black women, that black women are responsible for the position of black men in society. These theories try to divide the black community against itself and breed self-hatred among black women. They have influenced the popular consciousness of a generation and have been roundly denounced by black women. Third world women are organizing in school struggles, union struggles, welfare struggles, many in a national liberation context. Many third world women define their enemy as imperialism. They lead in welfare and prison movements. They have much to teach us about our enemy in international sisterhood and how to strengthen a people to fight. Racism is used against women, a form of counterinsurgency to divide us, the velvet glove and iron fist. By exploiting our concern for our families, the state convinces many white women that our main enemy is third world people. This is particularly powerful when our children are used as a weapon. Women's fears are created and manipulated. Real fear of rape is turned into fear of third world men by the press and the police. In truth, most white women victims of rape are raped by white men. Anti-sexist work is not necessarily anti-racist or anti-imperialist. Some women argue that we always fought for other people. Now women are fighting our own battles. Let us extend our sisterhood to the 100,000 women in To's prisons, to the women in Palestinian refugee camps, to the dispossessed women in Puerto Rico, and to the women in prison in the United States. Let us encourage the women who work against the Indochina War. Let us not justify complacency in the name of women. Militancy. Our movement will be self-defeating if we reject militancy as male and macho. This detracts from the resistance of our sisters in the past, denies the necessarily violent nature of the struggle, and is blind to the courage of the wars for national liberation being waged against the United States. Acceptance of the status quo of imperialism means acceptance of unprecedented violence. There is a particular importance in women learning to fight. For as much as the same for women who join liberation struggles in third world countries, actually confronting the enemy and fighting in demonstrations, acts of resistance, or armed attacks is tearing off the veil, a rejection of the passivity and acceptance for which we are bred. Women fighters are frightening apparitions to the enemy and examples for us. Women play a particular role in the armed struggle which guerrillas cannot well afford to ignore. Women are fierce fighters, out of our righteous anger at oppression. But we also have to work hard to learn necessary skills not naturally taught to us. Women are careful fighters, and to understand the need to rid our fighting of ego, we cannot let this strength turn into conservatism. Women unite and center the revolutionary community, mobilize the comrades to fight. This necessarily involves grasping the tools of ideology and political struggle. Insurgent institutions. In building alternative institutions for women, we must not deceive ourselves into thinking that our clinics or schools have solved the problems of healthcare and education for the mass of women. We must be aware of who they serve and when they don't. Alternative institutions must also become insurgent bases for a fight against the mass social institutions, on behalf of women at the mercy of hospital emergency rooms, public housing, food stamp lines, and public schools. Without power, reforms can be turned into weapons against us. Reforms which fought for every inch of the way, such as public schools, birth control, social security, and trade unions, become their opposite in the hands of the ruling class. We must make sure our victories are not at the expense of our sisters. Women have fought for abortion reform, a tremendous victory, but we have to fight to exercise control over the burgeoning abortion business and find ways to make sure that poor women can take advantage of this victory. Women have struggled long for safe birth control, but we do not have control of our reproduction. Poor and third world women are routinely used for medical experimentation and profit, subject to forced sterilization and unsafe family planning. We have the obligation to fight to stop the wholesale genocidal use of sterilization and population control against the women of Latin America. It is only the reforms which we have fought for that make our lives bearable. Survival struggles around conditions of work, welfare, life, health can weaken the enemy, expose his tricks, and win something real for all of us. Together, these elements make up a good program of struggle. But imperialism can never free all women. Sexism will not be destroyed until imperialism is overthrown. It is in the collective interest of women to do this, and to take full part in building a socialist revolution. We need power. Socialist revolution lays the foundation for the liberation of women and begins dismantling the tenacious institutions of sexism. The revolutionary movement, on its part, must embrace and support the rising women. There must be a solid and irrevocable commitment made to women's liberation. A revolution is not a moment in time. Old ideas reassert themselves and have to be fought against. Revolution is a continuing process. Bottom of page 133 is the woman's symbol with a fist holding a gun. Back to page 134, the Youth Rebellion. The revolutionary youth movement is a proud and beautiful thing. It has made a significant contribution to revolutionizing the society. The student movement engendered militancy and daring at an early stage of struggle and has greater promise still. Control of the cultural apparatus and value system is an essential aspect of securing the home base for a world empire. Therefore, struggles which expose, break down, and liberate people from this social structure are very important and form a front line of the cultural revolution. The cultural rebellion of youth has been a significant assault on the controls of empire. At its best, it actively carried the people of the United States into supporting the Vietnamese people's struggle for liberation and opposing the war, and it has provided an arena of struggle against racism where victories have been won. It produced a movement committed to communal and collective lifestyles, sexual liberation, and anti-materialist values. Youth culture. The revolutionary youth movement grew out of the contradictions within the oppressor nation society. It grew up at a unique moment, the height of affluence. Modern U.S. society, organized for the business of imperialism, is a place where young people face particular oppression. Schools, the family, the media all attempt to socialize us into a competitive, acquisitive, individualized system. The end result is intended to be competitive sexual roles, marriage, and alienating, humiliating work as functionaries for imperialism. In U.S. society, life is alienating. Sexuality is stripped of its expressive and loving qualities and institutionalized in marriage, prostitution, or pornography. Sexuality is denied its human content and is offered for sale. Art, too, is a commodity, something to be bought and sold. So are games and sports, no longer human exercises for the fun and development of people, but big business, packaged and programmed. The alienation of life is an ongoing, explosive condition of our times. Youth oppression is organized and institutionalized. Young people are channeled and coerced into schools, misled, miseducated, and misused. Schools have now become alien for the real process of learning about the world or how to use things. Schools are often huge minimum security prisons where we are held and controlled for large parts of our lives. In schools, we are taught to respect arbitrary authority, to follow orders, and to compete with sisters and brothers. The education industry plays the additional role of keeping huge numbers of young people out of the shrinking job market, thereby propping up the faltering system. Schools, in many ways, are the workplaces of youth. Youth are rebellious against meaningless work and face the problems of less skill and seniority, low pay scales, and dirtier work. Unemployment and underemployment are massive among youth. Young people are used as a reserve pool of low-skilled labor. Police, the courts, and prisons are increasingly geared to control the young. Out of work, out of luck, we are more likely to be involved in minor crime. The prison population is increasingly a young population. A large segment of youth has rejected the traditional values of society and has struck off in a search of a better life, more fulfilling life, and more humane and dignified social relations. Young people have become committed to collective work styles, to communities where work and life are integrated, where respect for community and culture and environment are priorities. We are learning to be open to other people's cultures and have borrowed from the music, stories, and ways of other people to enrich our own. The youth movement did not materialize out of thin air, but in response to imperialism. It united around and gathered momentum in the fight against the war in Vietnam. It declined when the troop withdrawals and the end of the draft removed the most compelling elements, bringing youth into the movement. The killings at Jackson State and Kent State during the protests against the invasion of Cambodia scared many people who had never experienced the wrath of imperialism so directly. People were confronted with the ruthlessness and arbitrariness of repression. The culture produced a group of people, nomads, communal semi-hustlers, sharing a certain sense of being alien to and in opposition to the United States imperial way of life. At the same time, this culture benefited from the affluence of empire, and in some part removed itself from engaging against the perpetrators of empire by escaping from the institutions of society. The cities are the front line in many ways, but the importance of work done in rural areas should not be underestimated. Potential exists for organizing among the rural poor. Unity can be built into Native Americans, Southern blacks, Appalachians, the rural Chicano, and poor whites, and the redress of the oldest and some of the cruelest crimes of imperialism. Bottom of page 135. I can't really make it out, but it looks like someone playing a guitar. 136. One edge of youth culture consisted of politically active people, organizers, embattled artists, people's musicians, free schoolers, mothers and fathers, and children of communal families. What has happened to this large grouping of people as the fat of affluence has dissolved over the last 3 years? Some have become small businessmen and have taken on the material characteristics of their parents' generation. Most have gone to work, are on welfare, or even maintaining a rural subsistence through small farming or crafts. Many live at the edge of getting by, women alone with small children, people eking out a living in groups. To the extent that communities serve among this group of people, there are real bases for organizers, not necessarily revolutionary, but open. This group of people constitutes a declass sector, increasingly proletarianized, whose experience in political work or in organizing alternatives can be a valuable contribution to our movement. There are serious weaknesses in youth culture. It is imbued with the sexist values of the dominant culture that bore it. It mainly looks to male heroes for models. It has failed to genuinely meet women's needs or to make a wholehearted commitment to fighting sexism. Sometimes trying to build cultural alternatives has become a substitute for struggle or has collapsed into hip capitalism. Do your own thing. At first, an advocacy to add to your own unique contribution to the community effort has become a slogan for individualism, splitting apart and undermining the solidarity that has been built. In many ways, the culture has withdrawn to rest on its privileges, disassociating from active opposition to racism and from active identification with black and third world people. A flippant attitude toward consciousness-expanding drugs is separated from the whole picture of deathly and pacifying drugs pumped into insurgent communities. The problems of heroin, methadone, alcohol, and pills have not been dealt with. Although young people experience police oppression day to day, police power directed against black and third world people is not combated. Rarely do alternative institutions organize to meet the needs of the black community, third world children, or the old. The best of the culture is realized through the process of struggle itself. This is what creates unity of opposition, builds anti-racism, breathes life into a sense of community, and makes our communities insurgent. Revolutionaries must embrace the explosive content of the profound alienation young people experience in U.S. society, and struggle with and change its accommodations to imperialism. It is our view that the youth movement is a force that has and will continue to affect the consciousness of the working class and the society as a whole. We must approach the youth movement with a consciousness of great contributions made by students, GIs, and other young people in anti-imperialist struggles of the decade. The armed forces. The army is one of the central oppressive institutions of youth. Young men are forced into the armed forces because of lack of education and employment opportunities. Once in the army, we are faced with the crudest and most direct forms of discipline and class oppression. The rebellion in the armed forces comes from the same causes that have led young third world people and white youth to rebel in other institutions of U.S. society. GIs have raised deep questions about the right of rulers to rule, of the armed forces to command, and the supposed right to torture and kill women, children, and men in Vietnam. The realities of fighting such a vengeful yet totally unjust war as the war in Vietnam broke down many institutional and cultural forms that have kept the armed forces together as a so-called proud fighting unit. There has been GI rebellion within the armed forces during every U.S. war of expansion, but the defeat of U.S. forces in Vietnam combined with the growing black rebellion at home accelerated the opposition into a full crisis. The justification for war grew thin. No one wanted to die in this war. We refused to fight and burned our draft cards, left the country, and demonstrated against the war. Instead of going on patrol, many units would head out a few hundred yards and sack for the night. A generalized alienation from military discipline developed. Imperialism needs willing fighters, but fewer and fewer can be found. Image in the middle of page 137, a group of protesters with a sign that says, "We'll trade useless metals for decent jobs." The resistance and solidarity of black GIs set the terms of the struggle and galvanized others. In the racist army, third world soldiers made up 45% of the casualties. Slogans of resistance developed. No Viet Cong ever called me N-word. Don't fight overseas for what you don't have at home. Attacks on the brass subversion of the military machinery and open confrontations spread among GIs. On occasion, whole units refused to carry out orders, both in Vietnam and in the United States at the Democratic National Convention in 1968. Thousands of young people who became the dedicated enemies of imperialism were trained in weaponry and combat. Veterans who came back to the United States organized against the war and led a national campaign against war crimes. One of the most dramatic moments in the anti-war movement was in April 1971, when the Vietnam veterans against the war threw away their war medals at the White House. Veterans face chronic unemployment, inadequate medical treatment, unjust benefit payments, and drug addiction at home. Vets are plagued by an oppressive discharge system which codes young men according to the recommendations of the ruling brass. This system creates a blacklist on the labor market against many returning veterans, especially those who didn't toe the line. The revolt in the army is anti-imperialist class struggle on the highest level, led by third world GIs, but with many white working class people involved. This revolt involves cultural insubordination, political education, direct action, and mass participation in armed resistance and sabotage. As a result, we have arrived at a new political situation. The ruling class can no longer confidently depend on the armed forces to do the dirty work of empire in all parts of the world. The great injustice of this system is that it leaves its potential unrealized while maintaining scarcity for billions of people. U.S. society is corrupted by the values that necessarily accompany piracy: racism, greed, competitiveness, brutality, sexism, callousness. The ruling class calls the backward criminal aspects of culture into being and sets them in motion. The society is the rat race, marked by an antisocial premium on individualism. There is a stark poverty for the masses of people, materially and culturally, a poverty in the quality of life. As imperialist crisis deepens, the entire fabric of social control is tightened and becomes more severe. Third world peoples in the United States, and also women, youth, and members of the armed forces, have shown the most consistent initiative and practice as measured by the decisive anti-imperialist struggle of this entire period, the war in Vietnam. These groups have been the carriers of proletarian internationalism for the time. End of chapter 5.